He claimed the luxury sedan was stolen. He claimed the woman behind the wheel was a criminal suspect fleeing justice. But the dashcam footage would eventually reveal a different reality. The state's highest-ranking prosecutor dragged from her vehicle by Officer Rhodes, a beat cop prioritizing ego over protocol. Rhodes thought his uniform gave him the power to intimidate a defiant black woman. He didn't know that the driver he manhandled on the roadside wasn't just a civilian. She was Natasha Hughes, the newly elected state's attorney who had literally written the manual on police misconduct. Officer Rhodes thought he was teaching a lesson in compliance. He had no idea that before his shift ended, he wouldn't just be losing his badge. He would be standing in a silent precinct and watching his own captain salute the prisoner he just put in cuffs. This is the story of the traffic stop that put the law itself in handcuffs. The leather portfolio felt heavier than usual in Natasha Hughes's hands, though she knew the weight was psychological. Inside were 47 pages that would dismantle a corruption network stretching from City Hall to the state capitol. 3 years of investigation, 18 months of grand jury testimony, and today, finally, opening arguments in The People versus Morrison et al., the case that would define her first term as state's attorney. She stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her charcoal suit. The fabric was Italian, the cut precise. Her mother had taught her early. In a courtroom, before you speak a single word, your appearance delivers the opening statement. For a black woman in the prosecutor's office, that lesson wasn't advice. It was survival. You look like you're about to ruin someone's life, her reflection seemed to say back. Natasha allowed herself a small smile. Technically, she was about to ruin several lives. Former Mayor Richard Morrison, his deputy chief of staff, 2 city council members, a police union president who'd funneled bribes through a fake charity. They'd stolen from a city that could barely afford to keep its schools open, and they'd done it with the arrogance of men who believed themselves untouchable. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, a text from her lead investigator. Media circus outside the courthouse, every network. You ready for this? She typed back. Born ready. It wasn't entirely true. Nobody was born ready to prosecute the most powerful people in the state. But Natasha had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. First as a public defender, watching the system chew up the powerless. Then as an assistant prosecutor learning how to wield that same system as a weapon for justice. And finally, 8 months ago, winning an election that made her the youngest state's attorney in the state's history. The victory had come with a mandate: clean up the corruption that had rotted the city from within. She'd written her thesis on prosecutorial accountability. She'd literally authored the state's current guidelines on police misconduct investigations. And now, she had the power to do something about it. Natasha grabbed her briefcase, the same one her father had carried when he'd been one of 3 black attorneys in the entire county. He'd died before seeing her sworn in. But she felt him in moments like these, in the weight of the leather, in the responsibility it represented. Her apartment was in the historic district, a deliberate choice. She'd wanted to live in the community she served, not in some sterile high-rise downtown. The walk to her car took her past Mrs. Chen's corner store, past the community center where she'd volunteered during law school, past the murals painted by kids who needed to believe the system could work for them. Her car, a midnight blue Lexus sedan, sat in its designated spot. Another deliberate choice. She'd bought it used, paid in full, kept every receipt. When you were a black woman in power, every purchase was scrutinized, every luxury questioned. The car was nice enough to command respect, but modest enough to deflect accusations of extravagance. It was exhausting, this constant calculation, but it was the price of the position. She slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against her back. The engine purred to life. NPR was mid-segment on criminal justice reform, and she turned up the volume. A professor from Georgetown was discussing the importance of prosecutors who understood that their job wasn't just to win convictions, but to pursue justice. Natasha nodded along, mentally cataloguing points she agreed with and places where the academic theory missed the messy reality of actual courtrooms. The drive to the courthouse would take 25 minutes in normal traffic, maybe 35 with the media presence. She'd built in extra time. Being late wasn't an option, not today. The defense would be looking for any excuse to request a delay, any sign of disorganization they could exploit. She merged onto the main boulevard, her mind already in the courtroom. Opening statements were theatre, and she'd rehearsed hers until every word, every pause, every gesture was calibrated for maximum impact. She would start with the numbers, the dollar amounts stolen, the programs defunded, the lives affected. Then she'd make it personal. Mrs. Rodriguez, the schoolteacher who'd spent her own money on supplies because the budget had been gutted. The firefighters whose station closed while Morrison bought a vacation home in Barbados. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. Natasha eased off the accelerator, coming to a smooth stop. She glanced at the clock on her dashboard. 8:47 a.m. Perfect timing. She'd arrive at 9:15, have time to review her notes one final time, and walk into that courtroom at exactly 9:45 for the 10 a.m. start. But behind her, a car pulled up. Then another. Morning rush hour building. Natasha reached for her coffee in the cup holder, took a sip, and waited for the light to change. That's when she heard it. The sharp whoop-whoop of a police siren, close and insistent. She glanced in her rearview mirror, blue lights flashing, directly behind her. Her first thought was simple, almost reflexive. I wasn't speeding. Natasha's hands moved with practiced precision. Right turn signal, slow deceleration, pull to the curb in a spot with good visibility. Engine off. Hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, where they could be seen. She'd given this exact advice to her younger brother, to her cousins, to the children of friends. The choreography of survival. Through her rearview mirror, she watched the officer exit his patrol car. White male, mid-30s, stocky build. His hand rested on his duty belt as he approached, not quite on his weapon but close enough to send a message. His stride was aggressive, purposeful. Not the walk of someone conducting a routine traffic stop. The walk of someone who'd already decided how this would go. Natasha took a slow breath. She'd been pulled over twice before in her life. Once at 19. Actually, speeding. Or once at 26. For a broken taillight she'd fixed the same day. Both times, the officers had been professional. Both times, they'd been black. The officer appeared at her window, and she saw his nameplate. Rhodes. His face was flushed, jaw tight. He didn't bend down to her eye level. He loomed. License and registration. Not a greeting. Not an explanation. A command. Natasha kept her voice even, professional. Good morning, officer. Can you tell me the reason for the stop? Rhodes's eyes narrowed. I said license and registration. I understand, and I'll provide them. But I'm entitled to know why I'm being pulled over. She kept her hands visible on the wheel, every word measured. This was already going wrong, and she needed to de-escalate. You're entitled to do what I tell you to do. Rhodes leaned closer to her window. And she caught the smell of coffee and something else. Aggression had a scent, she'd learned. Adrenaline and ego. License, registration, now! Natasha felt the familiar tightness in her chest. The calculation every black person made in these moments. Comply and hope for the best, or assert your rights and risk escalation. She was the state's attorney. She'd prosecuted officers for misconduct. She knew the law better than this man ever would. But none of that mattered here, on this street, with his hand near his weapon. "My license is in my purse on the passenger seat," she said slowly. "I'm going to reach for it now. I'm telling you what I'm doing so there's no confusion." "Is this your vehicle?" Rhodes interrupted, his eyes scanning the interior of her Lexus with obvious suspicion. "Yes, it's my vehicle." "Uh-huh. Seems pretty nice. Well, what do you do?" The question landed like an accusation. Natasha's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm an attorney. My license is in my purse. May I retrieve it?" "An attorney?" Rhodes's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Sure you are. Go ahead, reach for your purse. Slowly." She moved with deliberate care, narrating each action. "I'm reaching across to the passenger seat. My hand is going into my purse. I'm removing my wallet." Her fingers found the leather billfold, pulled it out. "I'm opening it now to get my license." "Keep your other hand where I can see it." "My other hand is on the steering wheel, Officer Rhodes." She used his name intentionally, letting him know she was documenting this, that she was paying attention. She extracted her license and registration, held them out the window. Rhodes snatched them from her hand and studied them with theatrical skepticism. She watched his eyes move from the documents to her face and back again. "Natasha Hughes," he read aloud, his tone mocking. "This your real name?" "Yes, that's my legal name." "And this is your current address?" "Yes." "You live in the historic district. Nice neighborhood. Must be doing pretty well for yourself." The implication hung in the air between them. Too nice. Too well. Too much for someone who looked like her. Natasha's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Officer Rhodes, I've provided my license and registration. Can you please tell me the reason for this stop? Was I speeding? Did I fail to signal? Is there a problem with my vehicle?" "The problem," Rhodes said, leaning down so his face was level with hers, "is your attitude. You think because you use big words and drive a fancy car, you can question me. I'm conducting an investigation." "An investigation into what?" Natasha heard her prosecutor voice emerging despite her best efforts to suppress it. "You need reasonable suspicion to conduct a stop, and you need probable cause to extend it beyond—" "Oh, so now you're going to tell me how to do my job." Rhodes's face flushed darker. "You one of those sovereign citizen types? Think the law doesn't apply to you?" "I'm not a sovereign citizen. I'm an attorney, and I'm asking you to follow proper procedure." "Step out of the vehicle." The words hit like a physical blow. Natasha's heart rate spiked. "Officer? There's no reason for me to exit the vehicle. I've complied with every—" "I said step out of the vehicle, now." Rhodes's hand moved to his weapon, resting on the grip, not drawing it. Not yet. But the threat was clear. Natasha looked past him. A woman across the street had stopped walking her dog. A man in a business suit had his phone out, pointed in their direction. Witnesses. Evidence. Small comfort when you were staring at a man with a gun and a badge and something to prove. "I'm complying," she said clearly, for the recording she hoped was happening. "I am not resisting. I'm opening my door now." Natasha stepped out of her vehicle with the careful movements of someone defusing a bomb. Her heels clicked against the asphalt. The morning sun was bright, almost mocking in its cheerfulness. She stood beside her car, hands visible at her sides, and waited. Rhodes circled around her door, positioning himself between her and the driver's seat. A tactical move, cutting off her retreat. His eyes swept over her, the tailored suit, the leather briefcase visible on the passenger seat, the pearl earrings her mother had given her. She watched him catalogue each item, watched his suspicion harden into certainty about something he'd already decided was true. "So let me ask you again," Natasha said, keeping her voice steady. What is the reason for this stop? Rhodes crossed his arms over his chest. You failed to signal when you merged onto the boulevard. That's a traffic violation. Natasha blinked. She'd been driving for 20 minutes. She'd made exactly 2 turns, both with her signal on. She knew this with absolute certainty because she was meticulous about such things. Officer, I signaled for both turns I made. I'm certain of that. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying I believe there's been a mistake. No mistake. Rhodes pulled out a small notepad, made a show of writing something down. I observed your vehicle fail to signal at the intersection of Broad and 5th. That's a violation of Traffic Code Section 21-654. The specificity was meant to intimidate. It might have worked on someone else. But Natasha had memorized the state traffic code during her first year as a prosecutor. Section 21-654 dealt with lane changes on highways, not city intersections. He was citing the wrong statute. Officer Rhodes, that statute applies to highway lane changes. The correct code for turn signals at intersections would be 21-606. She said it without thinking, the way someone might correct a grammatical error, a reflex born from years of legal precision. The effect was immediate. Rhodes's face darkened. His jaw clenched. You think you're smart, don't you? I'm not trying to be difficult. You're simply running your mouth when you should be listening. He stepped closer, invading her space. Natasha held her ground, but felt her pulse quicken. Here's what I think. I think you're driving a vehicle that's worth more than you should be able to afford. I think your story about being an attorney is convenient. I think maybe this car isn't actually yours. There it was. The real reason for the stop, finally spoken aloud. Not a turn signal, not a traffic violation. The crime of driving while black in a nice car. This vehicle is registered in my name, Natasha said, her voice hardening despite her efforts to stay calm. You have my registration. You can verify that right now. Registration can be forged. Then run my license, call it in. You'll see everything is legitimate. Rhodes made no move toward his radio. I'll run what I want to run when I'm ready to run it. Right now, I'm conducting a field investigation. Where are you coming from this morning? I don't have to answer that question. Excuse me? Unless you have reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime. I'm not required to answer questions about my travel. Natasha knew she was making it worse. Knew that asserting her rights would be interpreted as defiance. But something in her refused to play along with this theatre of humiliation. Rhodes's laugh was ugly. We got a lawyer all right. Probably watched some YouTube videos, think you know your rights. He pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need you to run a plate for me. Lincoln, Charles, Henry, 4729. Static crackled, then a bored female voice. Go ahead, 47. Check for outstanding warrants on the registered owner. Also check if the vehicle's been reported stolen. Natasha closed her eyes briefly. He was fishing, hoping something would come back that would justify what he'd already done. The seconds stretched out. A car drove past slowly, the driver rubbernecking. Another phone out. Another witness. The radio crackled again. Unit 47. That vehicle comes back clean. Registered to Natasha Hughes. Address on file matches the license. No warrants, no reports. Rhodes's expression didn't change. He should have looked relieved. Instead, he looked annoyed. Copy that, dispatch. He turned back to Natasha, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He'd pulled her over on a hunch, on a bias, on the assumption that something must be wrong. And now the system was telling him he was mistaken. He had 2 choices. Admit the error and let her go, or double down. I'm going to need you to consent to a search of your vehicle, he said. I do not consent to a search. Why not? If you've got nothing to hide, I don't consent because I don't have to consent. That's how the Fourth Amendment works. Natasha felt her professional composure cracking. She had a courtroom full of people waiting for her. She had the most important case of her career starting in less than an hour. And she was standing on a street corner being interrogated by a man who'd invented a traffic violation to justify his prejudice. The Fourth Amendment. Rhodes shook his head slowly. You people always want to talk about your rights. You know what I think? I think you're being deliberately uncooperative. I think your behavior is suspicious. And I think I have probable cause to search this vehicle for contraband. Based on what probable cause? I've committed no crime. I've violated no law. You have no legal basis. I have all the basis I need. Rhodes moved toward her car door. Step back from the vehicle. Officer Rhodes, I am formally denying consent for this search. Anything you find will be inadmissible. Step back from the vehicle, or I will place you under arrest for obstruction. Natasha stared at him. They'd crossed into territory she'd only read about in case files, only argued about in courtrooms. The moment where the law became irrelevant, where a badge became a license for tyranny. I'm not obstructing anything, she said quietly. I'm asserting my constitutional rights. Rhodes reached for his handcuffs. The handcuffs caught the morning light, metal glinting, as Rhodes pulled them from his belt. Natasha's breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not to her. Officer, you need to think very carefully about what you're doing. Her voice was steady, but she could hear the edge creeping in. The prosecutor in her was screaming warnings, cataloguing violations, building a case even as she became the victim of one. Turn around, hands behind your back. Rhodes's voice had shifted into something mechanical, rehearsed. The tone of someone following a script he'd performed before. On what charge? You can't arrest me for asserting my rights. Obstruction of justice, resisting arrest. I'll think of a few more on the way to the station. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of her suit jacket. Natasha jerked back instinctively. Don't touch me. It was the wrong thing to say. She knew it the moment the words left her mouth. Rhodes's face transformed, anger flooding into something darker. Permission. Justification. Now you're resisting. His grip tightened, yanking her forward. Natasha stumbled in her heels, her briefcase tumbling from the car onto the pavement. Papers scattered across the sidewalk. Her opening statement. Her witness list. 3 years of work dancing in the morning breeze. I'm not resisting. Her voice rose, despite her best efforts. I pulled away because you grabbed me without cause. I am not. Rhodes spun her around, slamming her against the side of her car. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Her cheek pressed against the cool metal of the door. She felt his weight against her back, pinning her. The handcuffs clicked around her left wrist. Stop! You're hurting me! The words came out strangled. Professional composure was gone now, burned away by the reality of metal cutting into her skin, of being bent over her own vehicle like a criminal. Should have thought about that before you decided to give me attitude. Rhodes wrenched her right arm back. The angle was wrong, painful. Natasha gasped. The second cuff clicked shut, too tight. She could already feel her fingers starting to tingle. Across the street, the woman with the dog had her phone out now, recording. The man in the business suit was shouting something. Hey, that's excessive. She wasn't doing anything. Rhodes ignored them. He patted Natasha down roughly, his hands invasive, humiliating. She stood rigid, trying to disappear into herself. This was a violation. This was assault with a badge. This was everything she'd spent her career fighting against, and it was happening to her. Officer Rhodes, she forced the words out, tried to find the authority in her voice. I am Natasha Hughes. I am the state's attorney for this jurisdiction. You need to stop this right now. He laughed, actually laughed. Sure you are, sweetheart. And I'm the chief of police. He pulled her away from the car, started walking her toward his patrol vehicle. You know how many people try that? I'm somebody important, you can't arrest me. It's always the same story. It's not a story. Call your supervisor. Call the precinct. Ask them who Natasha Hughes is. I'll call whoever I want to call when we get to the station. Right now, you're under arrest. And you're going to shut your mouth and get in my car. Natasha's mind was racing. The courthouse, the trial. Her lead investigator would be wondering where she was. The judge would be taking the bench in 40 minutes. The media would be asking questions. And she was being arrested on a street corner by a man who thought her intelligence was a crime. My phone is in my car. I have the right to make a call. You'll get your phone call at the station. My car can't stay here. It's blocking. Your car is evidence now. It'll be impounded and searched. Rhodes opened the back door of his patrol car, put his hand on top of her head to push her down into the seat. The gesture was almost gentle, a parody of care wrapped around brutality. Natasha twisted, trying one more time to make him see reason. Officer Rhodes, please. Just look at my identification. Look at my business card. It's in my wallet. Just look. Get in the car. I have to be in court in 30 minutes. I'm prosecuting a case. People are waiting for me. Should have thought about that before you broke the law. He shoved her into the back seat. Her shoulder hit the opposite door. The handcuffs bit deeper into her wrists. The door slammed shut. The sound was final, absolute. Natasha sat in the cage of the patrol car, her suit jacket twisted, her hair coming loose from its careful styling. Through the window, she could see her Lexus, driver's door still open, papers still scattered on the ground. Her briefcase lying on its side like a casualty. Rhodes was on his radio now, his back to her. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see his posture. Confident. Satisfied. The stance of a man who believed he'd done his job. A small crowd had gathered, 5 people, maybe 6. All with phones out, all recording. Natasha looked directly at the nearest camera, tried to communicate something with her eyes. This is wrong, this is illegal, remember this. Rhodes finished his radio call and walked back to her car. She watched him lean into the driver's seat, start rifling through her belongings. No warrant, no consent. No probable cause, just a fishing expedition powered by ego and bias. He emerged holding her purse, her briefcase, tossed them into his trunk like evidence from a crime scene. Then he got into the driver's seat, adjusted his rearview mirror, and met her eyes in the reflection. Comfortable back there, counselor? The mockery in his voice was thick. Natasha said nothing. She was done talking, done explaining, done trying to reason with someone who decided she was guilty of being too articulate, too well-dressed, too unwilling to accept humiliation as the price of her skin. She closed her eyes and started memorizing. The time, 8:53 a.m. The location, corner of Broad and 5th. The witnesses, at least 6. The violations, unlawful stop, unlawful search, excessive force, false arrest. The officer, Rhodes, Unit 47. When this was over, and it would be over, she would remember everything. The patrol car pulled away from the curb, and Natasha Hughes, state's attorney, disappeared into the back of a police cruiser like any other suspect on any other morning. The back seat of the patrol car smelled like desperation and disinfectant. Natasha sat with her spine rigid, hands cuffed behind her, trying to find a position that didn't make her shoulders scream. The plastic seat was molded for discomfort, designed to remind prisoners of their status. She'd read studies about it once, back when she was researching the psychological impact of pre-trial detention. The research hadn't mentioned how the handcuffs would cut off circulation, or how sitting on your own hands made you feel less than human. Through the metal grate, separating her from Rhodes, she could see the back of his head. He was typing something into his dashboard computer, probably filling out the arrest report, probably inventing probable cause to justify what he'd just done. "Officer Rhodes," her voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat, tried again. "You are making a serious mistake." He didn't turn around. "Yeah? How's that?" "I told you who I am. I'm not lying. I'm not exaggerating. I am the state's attorney for this jurisdiction. When we get to the precinct, you're going to find that out, and this is going to become a situation you can't walk back from." Rhodes glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold, amused. "You really committed to this story, huh? I'll give you that. Most people give up the act by now." "It's not an act." Natasha leaned forward as much as the cuffs would allow. "My office is in the Justice Center, 4th floor. My direct line is 555-0147. Call it, right now. My assistant will answer. Her name is Patricia Okonkwo. She'll confirm who I am." "Uh-huh. And I'm sure you've got that whole thing set up, right? A friend waiting by the phone to back up your story." He shook his head, turned back to his computer. "Nice try, though. Points for creativity." Natasha felt something crack inside her chest. Not panic. Not fear. Something colder. The realization that nothing she said would matter. That she could recite her entire resume, could name every judge in the circuit, could quote from the briefs she'd written, and this man would still see her as nothing more than a black woman who needed to be put in her place. "I was on my way to court," she said quietly. "I'm supposed to deliver opening arguments in the People versus Morrison at 10 o'clock this morning. It's a corruption case, high profile. Every news outlet in the state is covering it." "Sounds important." Rhodes's tone was mocking. Guess you should have thought about that before you decided to break the law." "What law did I break? Specifically, tell me what I did that justifies this arrest." "Obstruction. Resisting. Failure to comply with a lawful order." "I complied with every order. I provided my license and registration. I exited the vehicle when you demanded it. I did everything. You argued with me. You questioned my authority. You refused to consent to a search." Rhodes finally turned around, his arm draped over the seatback. "You know what that tells me? That tells me you've got something to hide. Innocent people cooperate." Natasha almost laughed. It would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. "Innocent people have rights. Asserting those rights isn't a crime." "It is when I say it is." The words hung in the air between them. Honest, at least. Brutally honest. This wasn't about law or procedure or justice. This was about power, about a man with a badge who'd decided that her refusal to be deferential was itself a criminal act. "You're going to lose your job over this," Natasha said. Not a threat. A statement of fact. "When the truth comes out, and it will come out, you're going to lose everything." Rhodes smiled. "You people always say that. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to get you fired. I know the mayor. It never happens. You know why? Because nobody cares. You think you're special, but you're not. You're just another person who thought they could talk back to a cop and get away with it." "I'm not you people." Natasha's voice was steel now. "I'm the person who decides whether to prosecute officers for misconduct in this jurisdiction. I'm the person who reviews every excessive force complaint that comes through the system. I'm the person who has the power to convene a grand jury to investigate police corruption. And you just arrested me for driving while black." For the first time, something flickered across Rhodes's face. Not belief. Not quite. But maybe the smallest seed of doubt. He studied her through the grate, his eyes narrowing. "If you're really who you say you are," he said slowly, "you would have told me that from the beginning. You would have shown me a badge, or an ID or something. I tried to tell you, multiple times. You called me a liar. Because you were acting suspicious. I was acting like someone who knows her rights. Rhodes turned back around, dismissing her. We'll sort it all out at the station. If you're telling the truth, great. If you're not, you just added filing a false report to your charges. The patrol car pulled away from the curb. Natasha watched her Lexus disappear in the side mirror, watched the crowd of witnesses shrink into the distance. Her phone was in that car, her briefcase, her entire case file, and she was headed to a police station in handcuffs, about to be processed like any other arrestee. The irony was almost poetic. She'd spent years fighting to reform the system from within, believing that the right person in the right position could make a difference. And now the system was swallowing her whole, indifferent to her title, her education, her authority. On this street, in this moment, she wasn't the state's attorney. She was just another black woman who'd forgotten her place. You're making a mistake, she said one more time, softer now, almost to herself. Rhodes laughed. Yeah, you mentioned that. The patrol car merged into traffic, and Natasha closed her eyes. In her mind, she was already building the case. Every word Rhodes had said, every action he'd taken, every violation of procedure and law. She was the victim now, but she wouldn't be the victim forever. When this was over, Officer Alex Rhodes would learn exactly who Natasha Hughes was, and he would regret every second of this morning. Natasha stopped talking. There was no point anymore. Rhodes had made his choice, and nothing she said would change the trajectory of the next 30 minutes. So she went silent, and in that silence, she became what she'd always been, a prosecutor building a case. Badge number 2847. She'd seen it when he'd leaned close to her window, when the morning sun had caught the metal just right. She repeated it in her mind like a mantra. 2847, 2847, 2847, unit number 47. He'd said it over the radio. She'd heard the dispatcher's voice crackle back, bored and routine, having no idea she was confirming details that would later become evidence. Time of initial stop, 8:47 a.m. She'd glanced at her dashboard clock right before the siren. Time of arrest, approximately 8:53 a.m. 6 minutes from traffic stop to handcuffs. That would matter. That speed would tell a story about Rhodes's intent, about how quickly he'd escalated, about how little he'd done to verify her identity before deciding she was a criminal. The patrol car hit a pothole, and Natasha's shoulder slammed against the door. Pain shot down her arm. The handcuffs bit deeper into her wrists. She bit back a gasp, refused to give Rhodes the satisfaction of hearing her discomfort. Instead, she added it to her mental list. Failure to ensure prisoner safety during transport. Handcuffs applied too tightly, cutting off circulation. Excessive force during arrest. Through the window, she watched the city pass by. They were taking the long route to the precinct, she realized. Rhodes was driving through downtown, past the Justice Center, where her office was located, past the courthouse, where a judge was probably already in chambers, wondering why the state's attorney hadn't arrived for the biggest trial of the year. Past the coffee shop where she'd grabbed breakfast with her lead investigator just yesterday, planning their strategy. Her phone would be ringing by now. Patricia would be calling, confused about why Natasha wasn't answering. Then concerned. Then worried. Her investigator would be pacing outside the courtroom. The defense attorneys would be smirking, whispering among themselves, wondering if the state's attorney had gotten cold feet. Rhodes's radio crackled. Unit 47, what's your ETA? He picked up the handset. About 5 minutes out. Got a real piece of work back here. One of those sovereign citizen types. Thinks she's above the law. Natasha's jaw clenched. Sovereign citizen. That would go in the report. That label would follow her through the system, a dog whistle that told other officers she was difficult, uncooperative, dangerous. It was a lie, but lies with badges carried weight. Copy that, 47. Booking is ready for you. Booking. They were actually going to process her. Fingerprints. Mugshot. The whole degrading ritual. Natasha tried to imagine it, standing against the height chart, holding the placard with her name and booking number, the flash of the camera capturing her at her lowest moment. That photo would leak. It always did. By tomorrow morning, her mugshot would be on every news site, every social media platform. The headlines would write themselves. State's attorney arrested. The context wouldn't matter. The truth wouldn't matter. The image would be enough. She watched Rhodes's reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked satisfied, almost pleased with himself. This was a good day for him. He'd asserted his authority. He'd put an uppity black woman in her place. He'd probably tell the story in the locker room later, get some laughs from his buddies. You should have seen her, acting like she was somebody important, talking about her rights like she was a lawyer or something. The patrol car turned onto 7th Street. The precinct was 2 blocks away. Natasha could see the building now, squat and institutional, the same building where she'd held press conferences, where she'd met with the police chief to discuss reform initiatives, where she'd stood beside officers and praised their service to the community. She would be walking into that building in handcuffs. But her mind catalogued more violations. Unlawful stop. No probable cause for the initial traffic stop. Unlawful search. He'd gone through her vehicle without consent or warrant. False arrest. No legitimate basis for the obstruction charge. Excessive force. The way he'd slammed her against the car, the too tight handcuffs, the rough handling. But beyond the legal violations, there was something else. Something harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. The contempt in his voice, the way he'd called her sweetheart, the assumption that a black woman in a nice car must be a criminal, the refusal to even consider that she might be telling the truth about who she was. That was the real crime, not the false arrest, though that was bad enough. The real crime was the casual dehumanization, the reflexive disbelief, the certainty that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly hold the position she held. Rhodes pulled into the precinct parking lot, guided the patrol car into a spot near the back entrance, the booking entrance, where they brought in the criminals. He put the car in park, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, finishing whatever he was typing into his computer. Natasha looked down at her hands, twisted behind her back. Her wrists were red, swelling slightly around the metal cuffs. Her fingers had gone numb. Her suit jacket was wrinkled, torn slightly at the shoulder seam. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins. She looked exactly like what Rhodes wanted her to be. Defeated. But she wasn't defeated. She was documenting. Every second of this nightmare was being filed away in her prosecutor's mind, organized and categorized and prepared for presentation. Rhodes thought this was over. He thought he'd won. He had no idea that the real trial was just beginning. Rhodes opened his door, got out, stretched like a man without a care in the world. He walked around to her door, opened it, and looked down at her with something like pity. "Ready to go inside and tell them your story?" he asked. "I'm sure they'll get a kick out of it." Natasha met his eyes. She didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't plead. She just looked at him with the cold, analytical gaze of a prosecutor who'd already decided on a verdict. Rhodes's smile faltered slightly. Then he reached in, grabbed her arm, and pulled her out of the car. The precinct doors were 20 feet away. Everything was about to change. Rhodes's hand was firm on Natasha's upper arm as he guided her through the back entrance of the precinct. The door opened into a fluorescent-lit hallway that smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, each step echoing in the narrow corridor. She kept her head up, her spine straight. If she was going to be paraded through this building, she would do it with whatever dignity she had left. They turned a corner, and the hallway opened into the main booking area. It was busier than Natasha expected for a Thursday morning. A dozen officers scattered throughout the space, some at desks typing reports, others standing in clusters talking, a few escorting their own arrestees through the process. The room hummed with the mundane chaos of police work, ringing phones, radio chatter, and the mechanical clack of keyboards, someone laughing at a joke she couldn't hear. Rhodes walked her past the first desk. The officer sitting there, young, maybe mid-20s, still had that rookie eagerness, glanced up from his paperwork. His eyes moved from Rhodes to Natasha, a casual assessment. Then his gaze sharpened. His fingers stopped typing. He stared at her face, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion to something that looked like recognition. He elbowed his partner, a woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked up, annoyed at the interruption. Then she saw Natasha. Her mouth opened slightly. She stood up from her chair slowly, like someone watching a car accident unfold in slow motion. "Rhodes," the young officer said, his voice uncertain. "Is that—" "Got a live one here," Rhodes interrupted, his tone cheerful, oblivious. "Wouldn't cooperate during a traffic stop," started spouting off about her rights, claiming to be some big-shot lawyer. The female officer wasn't listening to him. She was staring at Natasha with wide eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. The officer at the next desk had noticed the commotion. He turned in his chair, saw Natasha, and his coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. It hung there, suspended, while his brain processed what his eyes were seeing. The cup lowered slowly back to the desk. Forgotten. The silence was spreading like a wave. One by one, officers stopped what they were doing. Conversations died mid-sentence. Keyboards went quiet. Someone's radio squawked, and no one moved to answer it. The entire room was turning to look at the woman in handcuffs being walked through their precinct. Natasha recognized some of them. Officer Martinez, who testified in one of her cases last month. Detective Chen, who she'd personally commended for his work on a domestic violence investigation. Sergeant Williams, who'd sat in on her training session about constitutional policing just 3 weeks ago. They all recognized her too. She could see it in their faces. The shock, the horror, the dawning realization that something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. Rhodes seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. His grip on her arm loosened slightly. His confident stride faltered. "What?" he said to the room at large. "What's everyone looking at?" No one answered him. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with 30 years on the job and a face that had seen everything, had risen from his post. He was staring at Natasha like she was a ghost. His hand moved to his radio, then stopped. His mouth worked soundlessly. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Rhodes's voice had lost its swagger. He looked around at his fellow officers, searching for an explanation for their strange behavior. Officer Martinez found his voice first. "Rhodes," he said carefully, like he was talking to someone standing on a ledge. "Do you know who that is?" "Yeah, some woman who thinks she's—" "That's Natasha Hughes." Martinez's voice was flat, factual, delivering a death sentence. Rhodes blinked. "Who?" The state's attorney. This came from Detective Chen, who had moved closer, his face pale. That's the state's attorney, Rhodes. That's our boss's boss's boss. Natasha watched Rhodes's face, watched the confusion, then the disbelief, then the first flicker of fear. Then his hand dropped from her arm, like she'd suddenly become radioactive. She didn't, Rhodes fumbled for words. She didn't show me any ID. She didn't say, I told you exactly who I was, Natasha said quietly. Her first words since entering the building. Every officer in the room heard them. Multiple times. The desk sergeant had his radio out now. Chief, we have a situation in booking. You need to get down here, now. Rhodes was shaking his head, backing away from Natasha like distance could somehow undo what he'd done. She was driving a stolen vehicle. She was uncooperative. Her vehicle wasn't stolen, the female officer said, her voice shaking. I saw you run the plates. Dispatch said it came back clean. She refused to consent to a search, which is her constitutional right. Sergeant Williams stepped forward, and his face hard. Rhodes, stop talking. Don't say another word. But Rhodes couldn't stop. The panic was setting in, and with it came the desperate need to justify, to explain, to make someone understand that he'd been right to do what he did. She was acting suspicious. She kept questioning my authority. The door to the precinct captain's office flew open with enough force to bang against the wall. Captain James Morrison, no relation to the defendant in Natasha's corruption case, emerged like a storm given human form. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with iron-grey hair and a face that could have been carved from granite. He'd been with the department for 35 years. He'd seen riots and corruption scandals and officers killed in the line of duty. But Natasha had never seen him look the way he looked now. His eyes found her immediately, found her standing in the middle of his precinct in handcuffs, her suit torn, her hair dishevelled, her wrists red and swollen. His face went through a series of expressions too quick to catalogue. Shock, rage, horror, and something that might have been grief. Then his eyes moved to Rhodes. Get those cuffs off her, Morrison said. His voice was quiet, deadly quiet. Right now. Rhodes fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped them. They clattered against the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the silent room. He bent down, picked them up, moved toward Natasha with the hesitant steps of a man approaching his own execution. I'm sorry, he whispered as he unlocked the handcuffs. I didn't know. The cuffs came off. Natasha brought her hands forward. I rubbed her wrists where the metal had cut into her skin. The relief was immediate and painful, blood rushing back into her fingers. Captain Morrison crossed the room. When he reached Natasha, he did something that made every officer in the precinct hold their breath. He saluted her. Captain Morrison's salute hung in the air like an indictment. His hand was steady, his posture rigid, his eyes locked on Natasha's face. It wasn't a gesture of respect. It was an apology rendered in the only language he knew, an acknowledgement that one of his officers had just committed an act so egregious that words wouldn't suffice. Natasha didn't return the salute. She simply nodded, a slight inclination of her head that somehow carried more authority than any words could have. Morrison's hand dropped to his side. Madam Attorney, he said, his voice rough, I cannot begin to express. Not here. Natasha's voice was steady, professional. She looked around the room at the assembled officers, all of them frozen in place, all of them witnesses to a catastrophe. Is there somewhere private we can speak? Of course, my office. Oh, please. Morrison gestured toward the door he'd emerged from, then turned to the room at large. Everyone back to work. Now. And if I hear about this on social media before I've had a chance to brief the chief, You'll all be directing traffic in the rain for the next month." The room erupted into motion, officers suddenly very interested in their paperwork, their phones, anything that wasn't the scene unfolding before them. But Natasha could feel their eyes on her as she walked toward Morrison's office, could feel their shock, their second-hand embarrassment, their relief that they weren't Rhodes right now. Rhodes. She'd almost forgotten about him in the chaos of the reveal. She turned back, found him standing exactly where she'd left him, the handcuffs dangling from his fingers. His face had gone grey. He looked like a man who'd just watched his entire life collapse in real time. "Officer Rhodes," Natasha said. He flinched at the sound of his name. "You'll stay here. Don't leave the building. Don't talk to anyone. Don't touch your phone. Do you understand?" He nodded mutely. "I need to hear you say it." "I understand." His voice was barely a whisper. Natasha turned back to Morrison's office. Behind her, she heard someone say, "Jesus Christ, Rhodes, what the hell were you thinking?" She didn't turn around to see who'd spoken. It didn't matter. They were all thinking it. Morrison's office was exactly what she'd expected. Functional, sparse, decorated with commendations and photos of the captain with various city officials. There was a picture of him shaking hands with the previous state's attorney. There was another of him at Natasha's own swearing-in ceremony, standing in the back row, applauding. He closed the door behind them, and the sounds of the precinct became muffled. Natasha stood in the center of the room, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her reflection in Morrison's window showed her the damage. Hair wild, suit torn at the shoulder, makeup smudged. She looked like she'd been in a fight. In a way, she had been. "Sit, please," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair. "Can I get you water? Coffee? Do you need medical attention?" "Water would be fine." Natasha sat, grateful to be off her feet. Her wrists were throbbing. She looked down at them, saw the angry red marks where the handcuffs had been. They would bruise. Evidence. Morrison poured water from a pitcher on his desk. He handed her the glass, with hands that weren't quite steady. Then he sat down heavily in his own chair and put his head in his hands. "This is a nightmare," he said. "This is my worst nightmare." Natasha drank the water slowly, letting the cool liquid soothe her throat. She'd been so focused on staying composed that she hadn't realized how thirsty she was. "Tell me about Officer Rhodes," she said. Morrison looked up. "What do you want to know?" "How long has he been with the department?" 8 years. "Any complaints?" Morrison's silence was answer enough. He reached for a file on his desk, flipped it open. 3 excessive force complaints, all investigated, all cleared by internal affairs. 2 complaints about racial profiling, also cleared. 1 formal reprimand for failure to follow procedure during a traffic stop. And he's still on the street. The union fought for him. The complaints were deemed unsubstantiated. Morrison closed the file. "I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking." "Do you?" Natasha set down her water glass. "Because what I'm thinking is that Officer Rhodes has been doing this for years. That I'm not the first person he's profiled, not the first person he's arrested on fabricated charges. I'm just the first person with enough power to make it matter." Morrison didn't argue. Couldn't argue. They both knew she was right. "What happened out there?" he asked. "From the beginning," Natasha told him. "The traffic stop without cause. The invented violation. Rhodes's refusal to verify her identity. The escalation. The arrest. The humiliation." She recited it like a prosecutor presenting evidence, her voice clinical, detached. But her hands shook slightly as she spoke, betraying the emotion she was working so hard to contain. When she finished, Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. "I need to call the chief," he said. "He needs to hear this from me before it hits the news. Because it will hit the news, won't it?" There were at least 6 witnesses with phones out. The footage is probably already online. Natasha stood, smoothed her ruined suit. "I need my belongings. My phone, my briefcase, my car." Rhodes took them. "I'll have them brought to you immediately." Morrison was already dialing. "And I'll arrange for a car to take you wherever you need to go. Home, the hospital, your office." "The courthouse," Natasha said. I have opening arguments to deliver." Morrison stared at her. "You can't be serious. After what just happened, I need to do my job." Natasha's voice was firm. "I've been preparing for this trial for 3 years. The victims deserve justice. The public deserves to see that the system works. And I need to prove that what Rhodes did to me won't stop me from doing what I was elected to do." "You're going to be late." "I'm aware." Natasha checked Morrison's desk clock. 9:47 a.m. The trial was supposed to start in 13 minutes. "Call the judge's clerk. Explain that there's been an emergency. Request a 2-hour delay. Don't tell them what happened." "Not yet. Just say the state's attorney has been unavoidably detained." The irony of the word detained wasn't lost on either of them. Morrison nodded slowly. "And Rhodes?" Natasha looked toward the door, toward the precinct beyond where Rhodes was presumably still standing, still holding those handcuffs, still trying to understand how his morning had gone so catastrophically wrong. "Suspend him," she said. "Effective immediately, pending a full investigation." "Done." "And Captain?" Natasha met his eyes. "I'll be recusing myself from any criminal proceedings against Rhodes, but I will be filing a formal complaint. I will be cooperating fully with whatever investigation follows. And I will be using this as a case study for every police reform initiative I've been trying to implement." Morrison stood, extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Natasha shook his hand. His grip was firm, apologetic. "Make sure Rhodes knows he's not to leave the city. I suspect he'll be hearing from my attorney soon." She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. Through the window she could see the precinct, could see Rhodes sitting now at a desk, his head in his hands, could see the other officers giving him a wide berth, like failure was contagious. "One more thing," she said without turning around. "Get me his body camera footage and his dash cam. I want to see exactly what he recorded." "You'll have it within the hour." Natasha opened the door and walked back into the precinct. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. She walked through that silence with her head high, her shoulders back, looking every inch the state's attorney despite her torn suit and bruised wrists. Officer Martinez approached hesitantly, holding her briefcase and purse. "Your belongings, ma'am." "But your car is being brought around front." "Thank you, officer." She took her things, checked her phone. 43 missed calls. 67 text messages. The world had noticed her absence. Natasha walked toward the exit, toward her car, toward the courthouse and the trial that was waiting. Behind her, Officer Alex Rhodes sat in silence, his badge and gun already on Captain Morrison's desk. His career was over. Hers was just beginning to fight back. Natasha stood in the precinct bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. The fluorescent lights were unforgiving, highlighting every imperfection that the last hour had carved into her appearance. Her hair was a disaster, half pinned and half wild. Her mascara had smudged beneath her right eye. The shoulder seam of her suit jacket had torn completely, leaving a gap that exposed the silk lining beneath. She looked like a victim. That wouldn't do. She set her briefcase on the counter and opened it, grateful that Rhodes hadn't rifled through it thoroughly. Her emergency kit was still there, the small makeup bag she kept for long trial days, bobby pins, a travel-sized lint roller, even a spare pair of pantyhose. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Always be prepared to fix yourself. The world won't wait for you to fall apart. Natasha pulled the remaining pins from her hair, let it fall completely, then gathered it back with practiced efficiency. A low bun, severe and professional. She wiped away the smudged makeup, reapplied powder to hide the places where tears had threatened, but never fallen. She examined the torn jacket, considered her options, then simply removed it. The sleeveless shell beneath was wrinkled but intact. She'd walk into that courthouse without her armor, but she'd walk in standing tall. Her wrists were another matter. The red marks had deepened to purple in places, the clear outline of handcuffs visible on her skin. She couldn't hide them, and she realized she didn't want to. Let them show. Let everyone see what had been done to her. She checked her phone again. Patricia had called 9 times. Her lead investigator, Marcus, had called 6. The judge's clerk had called twice, and there were 3 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, probably reporters who'd somehow already gotten wind of something. She called Patricia first. "Oh, thank God," Patricia answered before the first ring finished. "Where are you? What happened? The courthouse is going insane. The defense is asking for a dismissal. The judge is threatening sanctions, and there are rumors." She stopped abruptly. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Natasha said, and was surprised to find it was almost true. "I was detained. It's been handled. Call the judge's chambers and tell them I'll be there in 30 minutes. Tell them I apologize for the delay, and I'm prepared to proceed." Detained? What does that mean, detained? It means exactly what it sounds like. I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to make sure that courtroom is ready. Is the Morrison defense team still there? They're practically celebrating. They think you're not coming. Then they're in for a surprise. Natasha ended the call before Patricia could ask more questions. She took one last look in the mirror. Not perfect, but presentable, professional, unbroken. She picked up her briefcase and walked back into the precinct. The main room was quieter now, the initial shock having settled into an uncomfortable tension. Officers moved through their routines with forced normalcy, but she could feel their awareness of her, their careful avoidance of eye contact. All except Rhodes, who sat at a desk in the corner, staring at nothing. Captain Morrison emerged from his office as she approached. "Your car is out front. I've arranged for Officer Martinez to drive you to the courthouse, if you'd prefer not to. I'll drive myself," Natasha said. "But thank you." Morrison nodded, then lowered his voice. "The chief is on his way. He wants to speak with you personally. Apologize. He can call my office to schedule an appointment." Natasha's tone was polite but firm. "Right now, I have a trial to get to." She started toward the exit, then stopped. Rhodes was still sitting there, and she realized she needed to do this. Not for him. For herself. She changed direction, walked to his desk. He looked up as she approached, and she saw that his eyes were red. "Officer Rhodes," she said. Her voice carried across the quiet room. Other officers stopped pretending not to listen. He stood awkwardly, like a student called before the principal. "Ma'am." "Aye, you're suspended, effective immediately. Pending a full internal investigation into your conduct during the traffic stop, the arrest, and the subsequent detention." She spoke clearly, formally, creating a record even without a recorder present. "You'll surrender your badge and service weapon to Captain Morrison. You're not to leave the city without permission. You're not to contact me directly or through intermediaries. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't verify. You didn't listen." Natasha took a step closer, and Rhodes actually flinched. "You saw a black woman in a nice car, and you made assumptions. You saw someone who knew her rights, and you decided that was a crime. You had multiple opportunities to de-escalate. I'm to check my credentials, to do your job properly. You chose not to. I thought, I don't care what you thought. I care what you did." Natasha's voice was cold, prosecutorial. "You violated my constitutional rights. You used excessive force. You filed a false report. And you did it all with the confidence of someone who's done it before and gotten away with it." Rhodes opened his mouth, closed it. There was nothing he could say. They both knew it. "The investigation will be thorough," Natasha continued. "It will be fair, but it will also be honest. And Officer Rhodes, I suspect honesty is not going to be your friend." She turned to Captain Morrison, who'd been watching from a few feet away. "Captain, I want a full review of Officer Rhodes's service record. Every complaint, every use of force report, every traffic stop where the charges were later dropped. I want body camera footage from the last 6 months, and I want the names of every officer who's worked with him, because I need to know if this is an individual problem or a cultural one." "You'll have everything," Morrison said. Natasha looked around the room, made eye contact with each officer who'd been watching. "Let me be clear about something. I'm not angry at the police. I'm angry at bad policing. I've spent my career working with law enforcement, supporting law enforcement, defending good officers who do difficult work with integrity. But what happened to me this morning is exactly why communities don't trust the badge. It's why people are afraid of traffic stops. It's why reform isn't just necessary, it's urgent." She picked up her briefcase. "I'll be in touch, Captain. Officer Rhodes, I suggest you contact your union representative and an attorney. You're going to need both." She walked toward the exit. The precinct doors opened automatically, and morning sunlight flooded in, momentarily blinding after the fluorescent gloom. Her Lexus was parked at the curb, keys in the ignition, exactly as promised. Natasha slid into the driver's seat, adjusted her mirror, and took a breath. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her mind was clear. In 30 minutes, she would walk into a courtroom and do the job she was elected to do. She would prosecute corruption. She would seek justice. She would prove that one officer's abuse of power wouldn't stop her from wielding her own power responsibly. She pulled away from the precinct, merged into traffic, and drove toward the courthouse. Behind her, in that precinct, Officer Alex Rhodes sat with his head in his hands, his badge on the captain's desk, his career in ruins. The law, Natasha thought, was finally working the way it was supposed to, even when it hurt, even when it was personal, even when the person in handcuffs was the one who'd written the manual on police accountability, especially then. The law was the law, and today, for once, it had applied equally. So, what do you think? Did Officer Rhodes get what he deserved? Or should the consequences have been even more severe for what he put Natasha through, and for all the others who came before her who didn't have the power to fight back? And could you have walked into that courtroom after what she endured, or would you have taken the day to recover? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of injustice confronted, power reclaimed, and dignity defended resonated with you, hit that like button. It really helps us share more stories that matter. And if you haven't already, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that challenges us to think about justice, accountability, and the system we all live under. And remember, knowing your rights isn't attitude, it's survival. Stay informed, stay empowered, stay blessed,